Hello, my name is Jacob Monk. Welcome to this short video about the subject how I became a Russian agent. You know, Russians, they have agents all over, not at least in America. They are controlling American press, American policy, American presidency election, and even the American president is a Russian agent. And there have been former American presidents being Russian agents too. You know Ronald Reagan, he made a lot of negotiations with the Russians and also with the Chinese. Well, he had high-level contacts in Kremlin. He was certainly a Russian agent. President Roosevelt, at the Yalta Conference, he met with Stalin himself at a meeting where the highest level representatives of Soviet Union and USA was meeting. He was certainly a Russian agent, and he made a peace with Russia, accepting that Russia had its own interest and its own parts of Europe that was under Russian influence. So this was a part of a peace agreement, actually the agreement that ended Second World War. And maybe I should mention Kennedy. He was certainly a Russian agent too, because he tried to make peace with the Russians and to make a disarmament agreement, and he really didn't want to support Israel with money anymore, and that is one of the big issues in the conflict between USA and Russia, because Russia has always been supporting Syria and the Palestinians, and Israel, they are just trying to fight to liquidate, to kill the Palestinians. That is the goal of the Israelis. Well, now I've mentioned a few of my family of Russian agents. And now I'm going to tell you how I became a Russian agent myself. Well, it started when I was in a young age. My mother, she was very intelligent, also very beautiful, and a very morally thinking woman. She was educated as a psychologist, but she was under heavy influence from my grandfather, her own father. Well, I believe my grandfather, he had 3 daughters, and the youngest of these daughters was my mother. And he really loved my mother, and he talked to her every day when he was home, because he was a traveling man. He was in trade. He was employed by the international company Nestle. He was selling milk powder all over the world. And while he was traveling, he took with him some other products from Denmark and tried to sell them in Asia, in Africa, in Southern America. My grandfather, he was a globalist before the word globalism was even invented. And because he traveled to all these countries, he had this idea that why don't countries agree with each other? What is the reason for these conflicts that creates war? And he had the idea that the only way to get rid of war is to learn different countries, different leaders from different countries, to talk to leaders from other countries, to understand their culture, to travel to other countries, to make understanding instead of conflict. The world will never have only one religion, one culture, one kind of state structure, one ideology, one kind of politicians. The world has always been a mixture of different religions, structures, ideologies, and different mentalities. So it will continue that way. And nevertheless, we need to have some kind of peace. And today, the weapons we have is much more dangerous. They are much more dangerous than they were when my grandfather was alive. And my mother, she knew about that. So she translated the ideology of my grandfather to a more modern kind of ideology. I remember my mother saying during the Cold War, every day the front page on the paper, they told about new kind of weapons being deployed in this country, in that country. New kind of Russian agents exposed in Denmark, in USA, in Europe, and all over. I remember once my mother, she said she had a philosophical moment, and she said to me, I would like that just one single day the front paper story of our papers would be, nothing has happened yesterday. Nothing did happen yesterday. Well, her wish was never fulfilled, because every day since she died, and also before she died, has had its own news, and mostly bad news, because the conflicts between East and West, they were gone for a short time after the dissolution of Soviet Union, but now they're back again. So most of my life, and I've been living since 1948, most of my life, I have been a part of this conflict between East and West. And how did I become a Russian agent? Well, already when my mama told me about the possible disaster of war, I understood that we have to go against war. We are never going to solve the conflicts, the political, ideological, religious conflicts between East and West, North and South. So we have to get some kind of peace agreements, and we need disarmament, because a very big part of the gross national product of the rich countries, and also the poor countries, it is wasted for weapons, and these weapons has only one purpose. It is to kill people from the opposing states, nationalities, religions, and ideologies. My mother told me that she wanted peace, she wanted her grandchildren to live, and I took this idea as a part of my own personal ideology. And therefore I started to travel in an early age. I started to travel to countries being a part of the opposing force. Already when I was in, it was in 1970, at 1970 I was 22 years old. I traveled to Soviet Union along with other students from the University of Copenhagen. We were 12 people sitting in a van. I think it was a Volkswagen pickup truck or something like that. It was a big van, and we were 12 people traveling together. First we went to Finland, and from Finland we drove to Russia, and through Russia to Poland, through Poland to East Germany to the ferry going to Denmark. This was a very interesting tour, because I had learned in my youth that Russia was the enemy. It was very, very dangerous, and they were all very hostile to Westerners. But the exact opposite was my impression. The Russians were peaceful people. They didn't attack us anyway. They didn't try to turn us into something else in a political or any other way. And we just had our freedom to do exactly as we wanted. And we visited schools, we visited factories, and we talked to some people. Well, personally, I don't speak Russian, so our leaders spoke to these people. Our leaders were students from the Faculty of Language at the University in Copenhagen, and they were fluent in Russian language. So it was a very good tour, and I learned a lot. A few years later, I traveled with my girlfriend, Gitte, to Cuba. Cuba, it was an ally of the Soviet Union. It was around 1972. And we went to Cuba, and we were part of the Brigada Nordica, the Nordic Brigade. Altogether, we were several hundred young people from Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark. And each day we had, in the evening, entertainment. We had speeches from different speeches. And in the daytime we worked. It was a labor camp. We worked in picking coffee beans and doing construction works. I don't think we were very effective, but this was a part of our way of traveling, our way of showing solidarity to the Cuban people who wanted to be independent, and therefore they had thrown down the American-supported dictator Batista and started up with a socialist country. Well, the Cubans, they were had a lot of solidarity with the Vietnamese people, and I was impressed by their very, very strong and deep felt emotions, their solidarity with the Vietnamese people. And of course I supported the Vietnamese myself. Why? Because the Vietnamese wanted to be an independent democratic society. They were occupied by the Americans. They were bombed by the Americans. They were poisoned by the Americans, tortured by the Americans. Well, the Vietnamese were mistreated, and their whole infrastructure, their jungle and their society was destroyed by American bombardments. That's where I got my basic worldview, that America wants to control the world, and they want to control the world no matter what method they have to use, even if they need to kill people. They would rather do that and control the still living population in one certain country than they will draw back and concentrate on their own society in USA. So America is a very hostile force to the world. It is #1 terrorist in the world. That's what I learned that time. And that has been an experience I've had repeatedly again and again. I'll mention Afghanistan, I'll mention Iraq, I'll mention Libya, 3 societies bombed and destroyed by USA for no other reason than they are Muslims. They have another ideology than we have in USA. Well, George Bush, he said that Afghanistan were responsible for the 9/11 attack. But the fact was that 9 out of 11 people that organized this attack, they came from not from Afghanistan, but from Saudi Arabia. and Saudi Arabia is a primary ally to USA. So USA should have bombed Saudi Arabia instead, but they didn't do that. They bombed the innocent Afghans. And later on they continued with Libya. They were supported by the American colonies in Europe, the so-called European Union. And nowadays, when I'm saying this, the Americans are trying to destroy Syria the same way as they destroyed Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Well, that is how I became a Russian agent, because I found out that already during the Cold War, there was an organization in Denmark called Samarbejdskomiteen for Fred og Sikkerhed. I will translate it into English. The Committee for Working Together for Peace and Security. Well, I thought it was a very good purpose to have, because I want peace and security. That's exactly what my mommy told me, and that's what I feel is a meaningful goal for all normal people in the world. But this organization, it was labeled by the military in Denmark, by the right-wing politicians, the conservative politicians, supporting the genocide made by American bombers in Vietnam. These, the same people, they said that everyone joining this organization, the Committee for Working Together for Peace and Safety, they were Russian agents. Well, I was not formally a supporter of this organization. I was not a member of this organization. But I had the idea and the information that this organization had some very good goals, and I supported them in my head, in my ideology, in my speaking, and a few times I always paid money to their collections. They collected money and gave most of them to the resistance fighters in Vietnam, the heroes of Vietnam fighting against the American imperialist occupiers. Well, I already found out during the Cold War, before the Soviet Union was dissolved, that my personal goal was in clear connection with the Russian goals. And nowadays, after Russia has been restructured, after Russia has left communism and are trying to build up a society with another state structure, at the moment under leadership of President Putin. Well, now I have the same experience. The goals of Russia, the goals of Russian foreign policy are exactly the same as my personal goals. Their viewpoints on foreign policy, they are identical with my personal viewpoints, and I've certainly not been indoctrinated from anyone, not from the Western press, not from the Russian press, not from my mother, not from someone else. I've just used my brain. My basic idea is that peace is much better than war. And you only get peace if you reduce the level of tension, reduce the level of weapons, and take care that no power is threatening other powers. These are the goals of Russia today, and these are my personal goals. Therefore, I consider myself a Russian agent, just like several American presidents has been it. I think like the Pope, all good popes in the world have always fought for disarmament. I suppose they are Russian agents too. And we have had a whole movement of peace in Denmark. It's an international movement. We are all Russian agents going against the military-industrial complex, against the neo-conservative right-wing extremes in USA, because we want to live. We want a peaceful world where we solve our problems with negotiations, not with war. We have had 2 world wars. We don't want a 3rd world war. Thank you for listening.